Hello, guys. Can you see me and hear me all okay? I'm just making sure that the camera, microphone, and all of that are working all fine. So if you can let me know, that would be super. We have about 5 minutes until we get started with this class. So, settle in, and I hope that you're having a good start of your week because it's Monday today, isn't it? It's been a busy weekend because it's bank holiday weekend here in the UK. So I don't I don't really know what day it is because it's like if it was a Sunday. So it's a bit confusing over here. Oh, hey, Raisa, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Betty. Lovely to see you here. Hope you're all doing good. Great. So let me just check that my PowerPoint is all working fine, which seems to be the case. Excellent. And yeah, so we're gonna get rolling with this first session of the Carolingians in about 3 minutes, I believe. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, hello as well. Welcome to this session. And you're very welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know how you're doing. What's your interest in this particular subject? Because as some of you may know, this is an entirely brand new topic for World Virtual Tours and for the Academy. So really excited to see what brings you to the class today. And hi, Doreen, how are you doing? It's lovely having you. Hope you're doing really good. And I hope that you guys are ready to learn some pretty weird names. Because, yeah, for a moment I forgot, when you're a historian and you read names, you don't often have to say names out loud. And then I was preparing, the class and the PowerPoint and just thinking about what I was going to say. And I was like, I haven't had to say half of these names out loud in like most of my life. My goodness. Some of them are proper like tongue twisters. So you're in for a treat in that regards. Lots of new, cool, interesting baby names which have not been in fashion for a while. So if any of you is expecting, I'm here to provide solutions. I'm sure that you will find them interesting. Excellent. I'm glad that you love history, Betty. That's great to hear. And thank you, Anne. It's very, very kind. And I'm glad that you're doing good as well, Doreen. So all all good on that front. And hello everybody that's just arriving to the session. We still have about 2 minutes and a half to go, so don't worry, you haven't missed anything as of yet. So settle in. Just so you know, the chat is open now for a little while before we start properly speaking, before I start sharing the PowerPoint and talking about all of these new exciting people from the Middle Ages. But like I said, a forewarning, today we have some weird names. I'm not expecting you to remember them. For those of you who may be concerned that they may appear on the test, I'm only using the easy names for the test, so don't worry. You will not you will not be marked down for that. And yeah, I'm just excited to bring back this topic to the table because I've been dealing with the Carolingians for a long time, but I've not had really an opportunity to teach or talk about them properly, in an open circle for a minute or two. So it's nice to be back in the game. It was nice opening the books that had been, relinquished for a long time on behalf of the Normans and the Vikings. So it was nice going back to it because in many ways the Carolingians were originally, believe it or not, gonna be my area of expertise until I decided, nope, I'll go to the other side of the water. But this kind of funny twists in the tale that sometimes happen when you encounter history. And we have literally 30 seconds until we get started, guys. So welcome everybody to the room. Hope you're all doing really, really good. And yeah, just make yourself comfortable. Say hi on the chat if you like. Always good to see where you're coming from, how you're doing. And we're literally just about to get started and get rolling. Hi, Lucia. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing? Hope that Romania is treating you well. Hey, Marty, how are you? Oh, Muggy and Rainy. Okay, we have it all in Nashville today. Glad to see the mix. Hey, Marion and Charles, thank you so much for being back. Welcome, Dolores. Hope you're doing really, really good. And well, it is officially time to get started. Hi, Chris. Hi, Mona. Lovely to have you here. Welcome, welcome. And well, So we're about to get started. So for the duration of the tour until we open up for questions, the chat will now remain open. But do indeed keep those questions in mind, because remember, this is a 4-part series. So every single Monday now at 7 p.m. until the end of the month, we're going to be engaging with this topic. If at any point you have questions in between classes, you're always very welcome to reach out. And of course, before and after class is really not a problem. And a very quick introduction before we get started. So many of you probably know me already, but in case you don't know, hello. My name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, and it is doctor because I have a PhD from the University of Winchester in, the Middle Ages, specifically the Vikings. But, the Carolingians were actually the first thing I had to study before I encountered the Vikings, properly speaking. So in many ways, I'm kind of revisiting my early medievalist roots, which is very nice to see. And this is the first part of 4 in the academy. Remember that you're going to have some time to rewatch the sessions if you come in late, or if you want to just re-listen to them, you can do that through YouTube and World Virtual Tours. And in fact, now in the chat, you have the links to the way that you can access some of those tours, past and incoming, and of course, the way that you can keep on supporting our project. The Academy has been very successful from the moment we started last year in September. I think it was my colleague Anna, actually, that kickstarted it all. But it's great to be able to bring you new topics, guys, and it's all done through the generosity of your donations to the project through PayPal and Stripe. So you have the links now in there for that in the chat. And as usual, it's a pleasure to be able to do this. And without any further ado, let's get rolling with the Carolingians. Except today we're not going to be talking all that much about the Carolingians themselves. We're actually going to be starting with their predecessors, because, context matters a lot in history. And I am very appreciative of the fact that not a lot of people have a clean understanding of the early Middle Ages in most of the world. It's a very messy period, so, I'm not surprised. In fact, you're going to see how messy it gets. And I also think that particularly whenever we see big powers rising, we need to understand where they come from, because otherwise it sort of feels like they just poof, materialized out of thin air and became powerful. And that's not at all how this story goes. So today, as a first session, we have from Merovingians to Carolingians. So we're going to have the full swipe from the fall of Rome all the way to the actual Carolingian dynasty becomes a thing. So we're going to be dealing with the period of literally the very early Middle Ages, from the 5th century up until the 9th, just before the 9th century, just so we are all on the same page. Right, excellent. So first things first, the fall of Rome and the early Franks. So the Franks is overall the name that you will see associated with both Merovingians and Carolingians, and normally the dynastic, tribes of what is modern-day France, and that in the Middle Ages we normally call Francia with a K. Well, the story starts, of course, with the last sort of decades of the Roman Empire. In the Roman Empire, the Rhine River formed a double frontier. It essentially kept the barbarians on one side and the Romans on the other. And alongside this Rhine River, we see a lot of these Germanic tribes, which is actually what the Romans refer to as barbarians, appearing. In fact, the word barbarian, it's still very much used in academia, even in these days. But just so you know, barbarian is quite literally the generic name Romans actually gave to pretty much any people who were not Roman or Greek in that regard, in terms of background and in terms of the roots, because that was their sort of standard of civilization. It wasn't necessarily and not always a detrimental trait. It simply just meant that they were not followers of Rome, or that had that Greek background that Rome had, absorbed. So the Rhine River is super important for us because that is literally where this originates. And in fact, if you're looking at the map, which is a generic map of how the tribes of the sort of early medieval period originate, you see that the Franks are actually quite far up into the north, perhaps in an area that we don't easily associate with France nowadays. It's mostly almost already into the German and actually the Dutch and Belgium frontier. So they obviously moved, like the vast majority of tribes at this moment in time. Well, what is happening at this moment in time is that, Gaul, the traditional Gaul province of Rome, is already starting to sort of behave autonomously. There are already a lot of splinter groups within the area. Normally, Roman generals who are Gaul or at least part Gaul, in terms of identity, who are essentially being given power on behalf of Rome to monitor the situation. But, the Roman influence is still very high, and the area of Gaul overall is still very important to the empire. So the remnants of Rome are going to be very high all throughout the early Middle Ages, in many ways as a shape of legitimacy. Now, remember that at this moment in time, Christianity is also an important part of the Roman creed and of their general culture. It's officially state religion by now, thanks to the conversion that it's promoted by Emperor Constantine. And currently, in Europe, the majority of Christian following is dictated not so much anymore from Rome because of the troubles they've been having, but from Byzantium. Remember that the Eastern Roman Empire is going to be once again that remnant of the actual Roman Empire, and therefore is going to mark a lot of those tendencies in terms of general cultural understanding. So Byzantium is going to carry on that legacy despite the constant tension with the barbarians. Some barbarian Germanic tribes have been already sort of exposed to Christianity. But what you also need to remember is that Christianity is at an interesting moment in time right now. It's not one monolith. There are different versions, and not everybody follows the same rules. So there are going to be conflicts in that regards. And well, with the succession of the Roman Empire as it comes to its end, what essentially happens is that the Roman provincial sort of governors in the area of Gaul start becoming their own individual kings. That's literally how it starts breaking apart. And this is going to pretty much mark this early stage of worrying, right? They are all essentially going to be or wanting to be the next person that runs the show, and there is going to be a lot of conflict, as we always see. But we do know that there is a lot of evidence of continuing structures for those early kings and governors of Gaul, particularly in terms of towns being still episcopal centers, the law and the government still following Roman tradition, and in general, it's the same show, just with a different branding, with a different PR. Well, this is how the Franks come into the story. Now, the majority of the information that we have about this tribe, the Franks, to begin with, there are many different sources from the Middle Ages, but one that we always see referencing is Gregory of Tours. And in fact, let me actually get you to the next image. So this is so you can see exactly where the Rhine splits, and you can see how those Franks start really cramming together around that border and creating that land for themselves. Well, Gregory of Tours tells us how these people come to be. The Franks, as you see here, are also not one monolith. There are Franks from different versions of Gaul. Some of them have the exact same cultural identity, some others vary. So, we don't have one hegemonious people altogether. So it's going to be very difficult for them to be united under one banner. The first proper sort of, I guess, compilation of these people existing as under one banner appears in the 3rd century, but is still quite sketchy. Now, you need to consider that Gregory of Tours is writing literally on the fall of the Roman Empire, just at the beginning of the 6th century, and he himself is Gallo-Roman. He's a historian, and he was Bishop of Tours, which was a very important town. So every kind of information that he gives us, of course, about these people come from the point of view of the church, and sometimes that can be slightly biased, but he's a fairly reliable source as far as we can go. And well, essentially what he tells us is that these people start banding together, and from that frontier in the Rhine, they start pushing down towards the Pyrenees, not always in the exact same direction and not always as an organized, push, but that's how it happens. And all of that is in the compilation that we call Historia Francorum, or in English, the History of the Franks, which is what you have here, the main copy of that book, which is very important. And if you have the opportunity to read it, it doesn't actually use a very complicated language. It's quite a quite a good read in that sense from a medieval source, and it would really help you understand, the background for this kind of thing if you want to go into, the proper evidence from the point of view of the medieval historians. Well, so Franks moving from the Rhine down south. So what? Well, during the process of advancing and creating their state as a people, there are obviously going to be some changes, and there are going to be people that will rise up to obtain power. And the first person that we encounter that becomes key into shaping this Frankish Merovingian dynasty is the guy called Childeric. Like I said, there are going to be interesting names in here today. So Childeric the First seems to be the founder of the dynasty of the Merovingians, alongside with his son Clovis the First, which we're going to hear a lot about, by the way. And Clovis, just so you know, is actually the original version of the name Louis. In case you can see the spelling, we essentially just end up losing the C, adding a U where the V should be. And that is why it's a very popular name in Francophone countries, Louis. Louis comes from Clovis, which is, well, the Frank version of the same name. Now, the Merovingians must fight to unite Gaul because, well, like I said, it was a mess. The area that is in the dark green is what Clovis will finally conquer, after his father and then himself altogether. But as you see, it's not a comprehensive territory. There is not full unity in the area of Francia, and it's going to cause, some issues. But the most important part is that Childeric and then Clovis achieve proper leadership of the tribes. They get recognized in that sense. Now, the whole of the Merovingian dynasty is going to last from the year 481, that's when we officially validate them, all the way up to the year 751. But it's not smooth sailing all the while. We reckon that, in essence, the reason why they consolidate is because they present themselves as a sort of continuation of Rome that has good military standards. And the reason for that is because we know that this man, Childeric, was actually a military leader at the service of Rome. So he had that experience. He knew how the army worked, and therefore he could promote himself as a, I guess, stoic, good general in the eyes of his people at a time of constant conflict. And with his local affiliation to the tribes in that area, that's how he manages to gain support. And then that passes over to his son Clovis as a line of inheritance. But the name of the Merovingians actually comes from a legend, because supposedly Childeric and Clovis himself are descendants of this almost semi-mythical king called Merovingians, if you see the dynamics there, which is always at the center of all of the tales of these Germanic tribes. So it's very important, for the sake of legitimacy, to say, oh yes, I have this connection with this very important guy that everybody knows, because it essentially helps you gain popularity with the people. It gives you some kind of trust. And if you can mix someone like a, legendary kind of person with the tradition of the system, and therefore pushing for the same rules, the same, government type, etc., that people are used to from Rome, then you can present a fairly united front that most people can buy into. Consider that, we haven't actually changed all that much as humans. We like continuity more than we like change. And in times of turmoil, particularly after the dissolution of the largest superpower in Europe at this moment in time, people were kind of desperate for a certain sense of familiarity. So any military leader that could give them that was essentially, just good for business in that regard. So that's how the Merovingians essentially come up here. Now, a very important thing about Merovingian identity, which a lot of people find interesting, is that we call them the long-haired kings. And we don't really have these represented in portraits or really, in coins or anything like that. But all the sources tell us that the Merovingians, part of their identity was that they had very long hair, which back in the day was often associated with military class, high prowess and whatnot in Germanic tribes. So we think that that is part of their selling point, but we are not sure if that is also a way of creating a certain amount of propaganda. And you will understand what I mean with propaganda in a few moments. The thing is, by 486, Clovis has finally become a man of himself. He has defeated his main adversary called Syagris, who was another Roman general that was competing for power in the region, and finally consolidates power in the north of France. But the most important thing that Clovis does at this moment in time to differentiate himself and promote his idea of kinship is what you see here in the picture of the left, is his conversion to Christianity according to the Nicene Creed. What do I mean by that? Well, like I was mentioning earlier, at this moment in Europe, there are different versions of Christianity. And a few years prior, in 325, there had been a very important council in Nicaea that decided that the official version of Christianity had to follow Nicaean council rules. A lot of the Germanic tribes at this moment in time don't identify with that creed. They identify with what we call Arianism, which is a branch of Christianity in the Middle Ages, mostly considered heretical, that essentially just has a few different takes on exactly what the relationship is between Christ, the Holy Spirit, and God. Those technicalities that Christians in Europe have been fighting for God knows how long. That was already an issue here. But Clovis, by following Nicaean rule, is aligning himself with Byzantium, with Constantinople, and therefore with Rome, rather than with the rest of all of those barbarians. So if you see what I mean, the man is very smart. He knows he can use that to his advantage to promote a higher sense of leadership, good military rule, good support from the religious background. Perfect. And that is how he really seems to become a very important man. Now, on top of that, Clovis is going to be a very big warrior king, and we see this commonly in many early medieval rulers. He's going to push, as you see, the border all the way down to the north of Iberia, and that's going to give him a lot of prestige because essentially, although his kingdom is not entirely consolidated, he has a great expanse of territory in comparison to all of his neighbors. And that essentially means that everybody needs to be on their watch for what Clovis is doing. But of course, as we know, well, all things essentially have to come to an end. And Clovis dies. And unfortunately for us, Clovis has 4 kids. And the way that Germanic societies normally did their inheritance was not necessarily by direct, giving the land to the firstborn. Normally, the kingdom was actually split so that everybody could inherit to supposedly avoid problems or kind of survival of the fittest. And this is kind of complicated for us to understand because although Clovis' territory was divided between his 4 children, the division was essentially internally. From the outside, everybody understood this was the kingdom of the Merovingians, but it was split in 4 parts, and each king of each part sort of ruled independently, but in conjunction with his brothers. I know, like I said, it is complicated stuff in the early Middle Ages, but as I'm sure you can imagine, this is going to bring about a lot of rivalries, which are not going to be good for business. So this is where things start getting essentially tricky. There is going to be a lot of internal war. And even when there is not war, there is going to be a lot of court struggle, people backstabbing each other in politics, in councils, etc., etc. So this often leads to a general sense of instability. And this is where, well, the new set of kings, already a century after Clovis' death, so we are now in the year 613, have now managed to consolidate power again. Clotaire II, here with the funny names, finally manages to pick up all of the pieces of the puzzle under one banner once again and tries to push further. But the constant war or internal struggle from the previous century is essentially going to leave the general rulership and monarchy looking a bit weak and a bit naff, if you see what I mean. So it's quite often that at this moment in time, local aristocrats, magnates, and even high to mid military leaders can have more power than the king in actuality rather than in theory. So this makes things tricky. And as a result, we don't actually know a lot about what happens in Francia in the 7th century. We have kind of like a gap in knowledge. And that is normally something that we see in the sources when there is a lot of drama, essentially. If you don't have enough time to record all the changes that are happening every day of the week, it's because stability is something that you've not seen for a while. Or if you don't have something to say about the king, you may not, open a page in a book to record, yeah, this king lasted us 1 year and did nothing other than just being useless, if you see what I mean. We do have, from bits and pieces, suspicions or at least ideas that at this moment in time, we also see a lot of regencies and minor kings ruling instead or alongside with their mothers. And in fact, we have a very long list of Frankish women who are going to be in power or adjacent to power at this moment in time. The list of Merovingian kings, it's honestly massive because they just don't last long. It's like leaving candy at the outside, outside entrance of a school between infants dying due to nasty circumstances, constant war, backstabbing, or whatever. It's nasty stuff. This is the original Game of Thrones. Like, you're going to see how the family of the Merovingians kind of goes proper crazy because it's very difficult to, keep all of this. But because of this and the general feeling of instability, we are left with sources that essentially make us feel that the Merovingian kings are good for nothing kings from a historiographical perspective. Now, let me explain. Historiography is the science that essentially studies the way we have seen history through the ages. So from a historiographical perspective, there has been a tradition they're saying that Merovingian kings were just useless and they weren't good for nothing. But there is a slight bias to this, and you will see why. Well, in any case, the last proper energetic king, an effective king that we're going to have of the Merovingians is Dagobert, the man that you see here on the right, and he's going to die in 638. So, the rest of the 17th century is essentially just going to be shenanigans 24/7. But before I tell you about the shenanigans, because they get complicated, let me just quickly put in the chat the links to the ways that you can keep on supporting World Virtual Tours through the donations via PayPal and Stripe, and of course the upcoming tours, including the Academy sessions in there that I'm doing over the next couple of months. Well, now, with these guys, we have once again the problem of partition, right? When Dagobert dies, the kingdom is once again split in territories. And here you can see the traditional regions of the Merovingians. The two most important regions are Austrasia, here on the right with Cologne, Mainz, and Trier, and Neustria, which is essentially where Paris starts growing. And Burgundy is also going to be very important, but Burgundy was almost a state of its own before the Merovingians acquired it. So it's always a problematic area. And Aquitaine is just going to be very recently acquired. So the majority of the power is concentrated in the north. Well, traditional inheritance meant that Austrasia went to one child and Neustria went to another, and then the rest, well, we can figure it out as we go. What is the problem? The problem is that the last proper legitimate king of the Merovingians dies in 678 without an actual heir. So not even anybody that could be, properly given the kingdom. So because we don't have somebody we can elect into power, the mayor of the palace steps in. And now I should tell you more about the mayor of the palace, because this is a very important role in essentially court politics. The mayor of the palace is sort of like a second-hand man advisor. It's supposed to be, literally a very close confidant of the king, an important member in the council, and sort of almost like not necessarily a prime minister, but definitely a minister of sorts. Well, the mayor of the palace is now gonna realize that here there is a chance to grab power, and this man is gonna be Pippin the Second. Yes, he sounds like a hobbit. Tolkien got his names from somewhere. So this is indeed Pippin the Second. And Pippin the Second is gonna start building power behind the throne, which means very early in the story of the Merovingians, they're gonna start losing power and they're gonna start being controlling by their advisors, and that's how they become puppet kings. So from Austrasia, Pippin II is going to launch essentially a campaign to take the territory that was left in Neustria in 687, and that is how essentially a new type of rulership begins in this territory. These mayors of the palace are essentially going to be the actual rulers, but not from a legal perspective. They cannot technically inherit the title of kings. So they need a front, if you see what I mean. Well, in the process, the mayors of the palace, following the traditions of Pippin, are actually going to do pretty good. The first thing that they're going to do is start expanding even further. So you can see here tributary regions. So the area that becomes Alemannia will become a tributary region of the Merovingians. Eventually, they will go up into the Saxons, into the area of Frisia and Saxony, and start chipping away into more territories that belong modern day, to modern day Germany rather than just France. And that is how, well, everything is going well until in 714, Pippin II dies. His son had unfortunately died before him. So the position of mayor of the palace goes to his grandson, Theobald. And because he's a minor, his mom is going to have to rule instead. So, the headache is real because there is no really a proper king. The king is being puppeteered by a mayor of the palace, who at the same time is being puppeteered by their mother, who is a widow, who has her own agendas as a woman, who doesn't get respected in court. As you see, things get completely meta and really out of control until a savior comes through, because the story couldn't carry on being this crazy, right? Well, enter the scene Charles Martel. Charles Martel is one of the most favorite, I guess, figures of the early Middle Ages. There is not a single early medievalist that you will never hear rant about Charles Martel, because he's a very controversial but very cool character, because he was actually the illegitimate child of Pippin. So, under normal circumstances, he shouldn't have been given a slice of the pie anyway. But he pops out of the blue at a moment where there is, of course, a big vacuum of power and where things are quite tepid. So he can just essentially come in and seize it all. And the thing is, Charles Martel is a man of charisma, is a man of great military prowess, just like Clovis, and therefore he knows what he has to do. And that gives a lot of confidence to the people. So they kind of just roll with it, if you see what I mean. But because he doesn't really have any legality, he actually has to choose a Merovingian king to serve as the front for his game. So he's not actually ruling once again. There is another dude, Childeric the Third, who is literally just going to be taking all the flack for everything he does, while Charles actually runs the show. And Charles, at this moment in time, is mostly going to be focusing on centralizing power and ensuring that, all the ups and downs from the couple of previous hiccups are kind of under control, but more importantly, the military campaign. For early middle societies, particularly Germanic tribes, which we know are people that value warfare, being good military leaders just carries a lot of respect. And Charles is actually going to do something very special. At this moment in time, the Muslim forces of Al-Andalus are marching all the way up into what essentially is now Frankish territory, and they're going to start crawling up. And in fact, there is going to be a big battle in 732 in Tours, which is the moment in which Charles Martel becomes sort of the champion of Europe, because he stops the very, strong advancement of the Muslim military forces, which is what you see here on the illumination on the left. So that's also something that helps him gain a lot of legitimacy. Remember the struggles that Spain is having from, the conquest of Al-Andalus and the remnants of the Christian kingdoms. Charles starts that proper identity of a crusader. I was going to say crusader king, but he's obviously not a king, but a crusader military man. He has that power, he has that command, and he has demonstrated that the Muslim Arabic forces can be stopped. So Francia right now is a game. Well, as a result, obviously Charles can leverage a lot of this to push for further, gains, and eventually his military prowess and the fact that it generally seems, from the sources at least, that people liked him well, he manages to actually being recognized as princeps, which is the title for essentially being the de facto ruler of the country. So he's no longer just mayor of the palace running the show in the shadows. He is legitimately the de facto ruler, but without the official title. There is no, new piece of paper saying here Charles Martel officially becomes so. He simply just gets the recognition. But that's already a step up in the right direction. What is the problem? Once again, Charles is not immortal, and in 741 he dies, and the kingdom gets split between his, at least this time, only two kids, Carloman and Pepin. Pepin, not Pippin, with an E. So this is essentially gonna be Charles Martel, V.20. His kids are gonna follow the exact same tradition that he has dictated. They both are gonna support the same front ruler so they can keep on running business as usual and keep on taking away more power from the crown for the mayors of the palace. Until finally, in 751, there's going to be something massive that happens. But bear with me because I need just a tiny bit of water. So the children of Charles Martel are going to have the kingdom split. Carloman is going to be doing a pretty good job, but Pepin really is the proper puppet master in that sense. And in fact, we normally refer to the next dynasty that's going to take over, the Carolingians, as being the Pepinids, as a result of his lineage. Well, Pepin is going to carry on campaigning, is going to carry on being a martial king, but more importantly, he's going to get really double down in terms of Christianity. Unfortunately, wonderful as Charles Martel was as a military leader, he ends up rubbing the church in the wrong way a few times, despite his prowess against the Muslim forces. We have some strange records that suggest some people may have even perceived him to be pagan. And this is something that, believe it or not, happens quite frequently in the early Middle Ages. Although all these people were technically Christian and had been baptized, practice was a different thing. And not just practice, behavior from the point of view of the church was a different thing. So certain traits that Charles had, being very pragmatist, not necessarily being fond of ceremonies, and those kind of things were not really good. So Pepin is going to learn how to improve from what his father did, and it's going to just start working very heavily in improving the church, and more importantly, improving his relationship with the Pope. The Pope at this moment in time in Europe is, the ultimate sign of approval. Any dynastic family needs the Pope in their good side, because although Byzantium is the reference of the standard of Christianity, the Pope is still the ultimate authority for Western Christianity. So you need to have him backing. And in 751, after demonstrating that essentially, Childeric is doing nothing, hasn't been doing anything for a long time, and is Pepin the one that has plans to move forward, to settle the church, and to essentially create this as a proper country, he manages to displace the king officially. The nobility support him, the Pope gives him the approval. So everything that Charles Martel was missing, which was the official title on paper, Pepin finally acquires. And this is a huge revolution, because it essentially means that, some guys in the background that were never royals, they didn't have any kind of relationship to the monarchy besides being admin, because that's essentially what the mayor of the palace was. They completely usurped power because they were proven to be more efficient and better at doing ruling business than the original dynastic family. And that's how the new shape of France comes to be. Well, before we discuss this, since I suspect we're sort of approaching the halfway point here of the talk, let me also, there we go, put in the chat now the links for the upcoming tours, including the next 3 sessions of the Academy and the tour of Winchester, which remember is on the 17th of this month. And of course, in there you have as well the way that you can keep on contributing to all of our projects here in World Virtual Tours, particularly the Free Academy, through your donations via PayPal and Stripe. And remember, if at any point any of the links, give you any trouble, just let us know so we can, we can intervene and fix it pretty quick. In any case, going back to the story. So the king, I was going to say the king is dead, long live the king, but that's not the case at all. The king is gone. Let's see what we can do. So this is a huge moment in the history of the Middle Ages because essentially, well, this is Pepin, by the way, just so you can see, even the iconography changes. You realize, perhaps some of you that have done the Academy of the Normans with me may recognize how some of the portraits start looking a bit similar. This is essentially how the now incoming Pepinid Carolingians are going to start promoting themselves as actual kings. But if you realize, a lot of that iconography is still following the designs of Rome. Although the clothes follow medieval patterns, everything else has at least Roman aesthetic to it. And the Carolingians are going to exploit this to death. Well, who are the Carolingians? What are they going to do? So we normally refer to the Carolingians, properly speaking, to the kings that come from Pepin after. And of course, the most important of those is going to be Charlemagne, who's going to be, his son. But the name of the Carolingians actually is assumed from both Charles Martel and Charlemagne, because without Charles Martel completely, intervening and sort of taking, things into his own hands, Pepin would have never had a choice, if you see what I mean. It would have just been a further mishmash of random rulers that didn't do anything until probably internal turmoil in France would have just broken up and the country would have been divided. So in honor of Charlemagne, because of course he's going to be the most important ruler, and we will see that next week with the monarchs of the Carolingians, Charlemagne matters, but Charles Martel too. Since they're both Charles of some kind, there is where we get the name Carolingians, because back in the day, it would have come from the root of Karl. That's where Charles comes from too. And so this is the name. Well, the official moment when Pepin acquires this title means that the Carolingians now have, as a dynasty, the title for the mayor of the palace, so they will still continue doing admin duties, but properly the official titles of Dux et Princeps Francorum, which means Duke and Prince of Francia. Why Dux and Prince? Because in origin, before they become, proper kings, the Roman title for what they had was as a duchy. That's why they were so far up north, and then they had to start, coming farther down. That's how the majority of these medieval dynasties end up accumulating a lot of random different titles, because with different portions of landscape and territory come different nobility records that essentially give you more validation. That's essentially how it works. Well, now that they have both of these titles, they make sure to make them hereditary titles. So there is going to be no more the issue of, no, everything is going to be split, or we need to vote somebody to run the show. It's going to be normally hereditary to the oldest son. In case that there is more than one, it will be split in a very specific way to avoid a lot of the turmoil, or at least that's the theory. As we're going to see next week, doesn't always work out that way, but that is the theory. And in general, this means they are official, validated by the Pope, de facto rulers of the Franks. they will reach their peak of power in the 9th century. And here in the map that I've put here on the right, you can see how the evolution happens, right? The original Frankish territory, which is Austrasia, then we start with the conquest into Neustria, then Aquitaine and Burgundy. Now we have crossed over pretty much to the territory of the Visigoths. Notice how right at the very bottom, the very famous city of Barcelona was actually a Frankish town for a really long time. And obviously, on the right, we start seeing all of the new boundaries that through the mostly leadership of Charlemagne and his descendants, they are going to acquire. So as you see, this is not just France. It's actually half of Central Europe. And that is why the Carolingians are going to be so important, because they grow their territory massively. They never quite reach the full extension of Rome, which is really what they wanted, and the reason why they sort of dress themselves as new emperors, if you see what I mean. But their ambitions are very clear. One of the main reasons why they're really never going to be able to go all the way properly into Hispania will be because the Muslim forces of the Umayyad Caliphate are going to be very strong, so it's a very difficult adversary to face. And on the east, there is actually a lot of trouble. And one of the main important issues in the eastern border is the fact that they are actually very close to the Khanates that come from the central steppes of Asia, who are once again very warlike people with very heavily trained warriors and not necessarily good for Carolingian business. So keeping that hard border is always going to be important, and it's always going to be under patrol. Well, during this time period, the Carolingians we often say that they experience a renaissance. It's something that some historians are pro and others are against of sort of utilizing. But the picture that you have here on the left are three of the most important scholars in this moment in time. One of them is Alcuin, who's going to be very important for us to understand the rule of Charlemagne. And essentially, during this time period, we're going to see a revival of statecraft. Charlemagne particularly is going to double back essentially into how do we rule the state, how to rectify all those problems that were inherited from the Merovingians, how to improve their law codes, etc., etc. They're going to create much harsher, in many ways, region controls. And what do I mean by that? As you see, all of these different regions sort of come together to form one country, but they have their own traditions. They also have their own problems. Places that have been recently conquered have issues of identity. They normally require more military support. In places closer to where the court is, you see often problems of, political dynamics. So there is going to be different rules that apply to different places, and there is going to be a very close eye that is always applied onto it. And the most important thing that happens between Pepin and Charlemagne, of course, is that now that they have the validation of the Pope, they need to reform the church. I've already told you the big mess that we have in the Germanic tribes at this moment in time. Clovis had converted, and the rest of the Merovingian kings, bless them, they had just acted Christian as they could, but the church was very dispersed at this moment in time. There were no proper rules. And at this moment, particularly the papacy is very hot into implementing rules for monastic foundations so that learning and education and the right message of the Bible can be promoted. So again, the Carolingians, which are not, dumb and blind to what's happening in Europe, are going to decide we need to really build ourselves up and reform. And the Carolingian reform of the church is also going to lead to one of the most beautiful moments of early art in Europe, because as you know, and many of you who have just finished the Art in Europe Academy with me would know, the church is going to be leader for the promotion of architecture and art. So Carolingian art, which we will be seeing specifically in the next few weeks, will really come to flourish at this moment in time, and it will truly become a golden age. But the golden age is not always going to be, peachy. So unfortunately, and that's normally why we say that the peak of the Carolingians comes with Charlemagne, after Charlemagne, things start falling apart a little. And well, we will see that mostly, throughout the weeks to come. But the other thing that I really wanted you to understand, guys, is I've put this image here for you. In In reality, from this moment on, Francia and the state of the Franks, being that France and Germany, become the really true north of Europe, the modelic nation to be. And in fact, the truest legacy of the Carolingians, just so you understand the impact and the ripples throughout history, is going to be that the fact almost every other ruler of France, and I'm talking of the modern state of France since then, up until recently, could trace themselves back as descendants of Charlemagne. So, from the point of view of legacy, from the point of view of legitimacy, of power, of control, of image, that's incredibly powerful. Very few dynasties in Europe can say that their kings descend directly from this guy who was the top dog essentially in the 8th century. So, you see the amount of political campaigning, propaganda, and general statecraft that these kings would build for themselves and that will shape the country from that moment on. And that is probably all I can blabber about this without giving away much of what's coming in the next couple of weeks. So before we move on to some questions and whatnot, I just wanted to give you some books of reference. So apart from really recommending that you read Gregory of Tours, which you can do online, by the way, the online translations of Gregory of Tours are not terrible, but they can have some problems. If you want to understand the Franks just as a tribe, Thurman and the Rise of the Franks just kind of goes into a lot more detail of how those tribes come together, how they work, where their origins are. Then Fox with the Merovingians in historiographical tradition is very important, so you understand the bias and so you understand this idea of the do nothing kings. They had long hair, all they care about was being pretty and sitting on the throne. They couldn't actually rule the state, but how much of that is true and how much is propaganda created by the mayors of the palace, that's a different story. Wood, the Merovingian kingdoms, is very good at explaining how the different factions sort of work within them. And you must really read something about Charles Martel. The book that I've chosen is perhaps the best book that exists about Charles Martel, which is actually written in French originally. And if any of you know French, frankly, although sources in English are abundant, the best thing that you can do is just buy books in French written by French authors. And Minois, in this particular case, is just top notch. And their biography of Charles Martel is a delight to read. So on that note, I'm just gonna open the chat now so you can ask away any questions that you may have about these Carolingian, Merovingian, Frankish rulers. And more importantly, I want to know which one is the top name for babies that we should be bringing back from the Franks in the 21st century. But while I open the chat, I'm just gonna grab some more water because it's high season. It's been a bank holiday weekend, so I've been talking all weekend, and I'm pretty throat exhausted. So bear with me. Right, that's a little better in that sense. No worries. Right, let me just open the chat back up. Oh, no worries, Astrid. I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it. My pleasure. And definitely bring Pippin back, Pranav, right? I mean, I reckon it must be popular because with the Lord of the Rings, and now that he's a pretty cool dude that actually did good for his people, I think Pippin deserves, a further stake into this story for sure. Haven't much. Well, no, this is what I was saying, Ashrith, and one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this together, because this is really a brand new topic to World Virtual Tours, and in many cases, the very period itself, because it's very early in the Middle Ages. I'm an art major, and I was wondering, is there a possibility of partaking in the art tour? Yes, of course, Mona. So which one do you mean? If you mean the one where we're gonna be looking at Carolingian art, this is part of the 4 of the next 3 weeks. Essentially, it comes alongside. It's not next week. I believe it's on week 3. And we will see part of that on week 4 as well, about the art of the Carolingians. But in the previous academy, which we just finished literally last week, the art of the Middle Ages, which if you go into World Virtual Tours the Academy or YouTube, you may still be able to find out. We did already look at Romanesque art and architecture, so you can get some more context in there as well. No worries, thank you so much. Dagobert is, I think Dagobert is kind of cool because you can short it down to Dago, which kind of sounds really hip, but I knew you guys would love this. Honestly, I was just kind of going crazy revising all my names the other day, thinking, my God, these people are gonna think I'm just going mad. But they are legitimate names, I swear. No worries. Oh, thank you so much, Lynn. It's very, very kind of you. Thank you, everybody, for the lovely messages. And I can see that we have a couple of motions for, good names. I'm just gonna quickly go back to the books because a couple of people have asked me. So just heading back that way, and let me just catch up with the rest of the chat in here, right? And yes, so the recording is gonna be in after the lecture. So as soon as, well, not as soon as the meeting is over, but in the sort of few minutes afterwards, you will be able to see that. Thank you so much, guys. You're very, very kind. I can see that this is something that has resonated with a lot of people. So thank you so much for doing that. And no worries, Polly. Like, you can come in to watch the replay. So there you go. And I'm sure that we will be able to do this again at some other point. Your dog is Dagobert. This is amazing, Renu. Oh my God, this is great. I'm sold. Dagobert and Pippin are coming back. I'm tempted to buy a couple of, like, I don't know, fish and just, like, in honor of this. Is Pippa, well, the thing is, Pippin eventually will also root in with names like Philip. So, there is a clear connection in there that has sort of just been missed because of the modern linguistics in that regards. Right, I'm just gonna go back now to the sort of end page, and I'm just gonna quickly put in the chat the links to the upcoming tours and the donations through PayPal and Stripe, which will also allow me to refresh and get to a few more questions. So please bear with me. No worries. Thank you so much. Very, very kind messages. Very lovely to see that this has opened your eyes to more. And yes, like I said, it's quite a complicated, I do really appreciate it's quite a complicated thing to wrap your head around. Linda, you're definitely not the only one. Like I said, I think maybe one of the reasons why I ended up going into the Vikings rather than the Carolingians is because, in Norse stuff, there are shenanigans happening, but the coming and going of Merovingian kings is honestly a nightmare. I dare you, any of you, even on Wikipedia, the list of Merovingian kings in Wikipedia is like several pages long because it's just one after the other. Is absolutely crazy. Just so you can really see how truly messy it is for us as historians to keep up. Because and the problem is sometimes you get somebody's name, but like I said, nothing quite remarkable happens. So you're like, cool, so this guy existed and was in power. Awesome. Like, what else am I gonna do about it? It's quite complicated in that regard. So, it's one of those. Never thought, well, there you go. Excellent. I'm so glad. And well, yes, all of the academies will come back as well at some point. So even if you don't manage to catch the repeat, they will come through. And remember that at the end of every single session, you also get an email for feedback. So if there is a specific session that you guys have really loved or you want to have back, do let us know, because if I know you guys want me to do something, sooner rather than later, then I will not go on my random, ramblings of, oh, this month we will do this or that. And obviously we will cater for what you want. It's very important for us to service our community. So, it's very important. And yes, you're right, Helen. In French, Pepin and Papin are indeed used as surnames because, well, eventually they become, like I said, they become patrimonies and they become members of dynasty. So any dynastic name can often then be translated into a surname quite commonly. So it's one of those in that regards. Thank you. So I'm very, very glad that this has really resonated with you guys. And yes, Doreen, feel free to fire away. No problem at all. Very happy, like I said, to answer your questions. In fact, guys, I'm just going to put in the chat very quickly my direct email address. I thought I had put it on one of the slides, but I hadn't, because obviously I missed that one. But you are always very welcome to message me any questions at info@travolutiontours.com at any point. It's no worries at all. So happy to help in that regards. But very, very good to do this in that sense. Excellent. And it's 2001 2002 since I did a very long course on the barbarians. Well, yes. And the good thing is that in recent years as well, we've had a lot more new scholarship that has come through because they've become a bit more popular. So there are some really good new sources and books out there that I really do recommend. Right, I'm just gonna put one more time the links into the chat for the upcoming tours and the donations in there. And I'm just gonna check any sort of comments that have just come lately that I may have missed. Oh, thank you so much. What about the links in between the Vlachs and Wallachia? Yes, those, Lucia, there is actually a lot to be said in there because the cultural identity of what we often refer to as Eastern Europe, but frankly, it's not really Eastern Europe. Or I mean, it's in the east of Europe, but you cannot compare the history of Belarus with the history of Romania, if you see what I mean. Like, no, not even a point in comparison. There are a lot of linguistic links between those. And indeed, often a lot of those names are given by contemporaries at that moment in time. So there are links between all of them, and part of them are simply foreign words that are just given a different use, and some of them are often, in the case of what we have in that area closer to the Balkans, is often related to linguistic evidence that is reported by Byzantium, because of course, being the big court of knowledge, Byzantium had a lot of sway into how a lot of these people are portrayed. But there are 100% linguistic links in there in that case. So, I hope if any of you have a more direct interest in linguistics, definitely want to look out for. And thank you so much for a couple of people who have asked how I'm doing. I'm actually doing much better. My house is not leaking anymore. So thanks for your concern. It's very kind. I'm doing, good to see that the house is steady. So thank you for your support. And again, thank you for the lovely comments. I believe that this is pretty much the end of my hour though. So thank you so much for sharing this spot with me. We will be back again next week with part 2. So in part 2, what we're gonna do is we're essentially gonna pick where we've left it today, and we're just gonna look at all of the Carolingian rulers. So the ones that come after Pepin and what they do in a, sort of like overview of what their reigns entail and what they become known for. So you will see how the shenanigans unveil in a completely different way. And in any case, it's been lovely seeing you. I'm wishing you a very lovely start of your week, and see you next week for some more. Take care and have a blessed